Hi, this is Justin, and I have got something new for you guys. So what I want to do is I want to start going through the seven basic plots by Christopher Booker here. This is an absolutely huge tome, a huge book by Christopher Booker that represents over 30 years of research into this theory. That you'll hear about this theory all over the place, that there are only seven archetypal plots. As we go through this, you'll see that it's not exactly true in the sense that there are only seven, but it is true in the sense, as far as I can tell, as far as the research that I've done over the past couple of years with this, that there are certain reoccurring patterns and themes, seven of which you're going to see over and over and over. And it's definitely worth looking at. It's definitely worth exploring each of the seven types for a number of reasons. Uh, it really, for me, gets to the heart of what it is to be a human being. One thing, the more you study story, the more you'll find that it's embedded in almost everything we do. It's certainly true in our unconscious or subconscious. It's in our dreams. Our dreams take on narrative form. If you want to talk about truth and fact, scientific theories, pictures and metaphors for what the world is like, you'll notice that those are all nested in narrative. They're nested in story. They are communicated through story. Even if you're talking about the cold, hard facts, in order for me to tell you about it, I have to give you a symbol or a metaphor or a narrative in order to do so, right? And then, of course, you've got myth, you've got religious stories, you've got all of these commonalities between cultures in mythology, and then you've got universal symbolism. A lot of what we do, a lot of our task of sense making, not only sense making, but also operating in the world, living in the world, learning how to thrive and survive in the world, has to do with story. One psychologist that I follow says something along the lines of the reason why certain characters die in the story is so that you don't have to die in real life, right? The character is in some sense a substitute for you. The character makes the mistake and dies. You internalize the story. Now you have the wisdom to go out into your life and not make that same mistake, right? So it's a very, very powerful process that these stories have. So this video here is just going to be an introduction to the seven basic plots, and then I'm going to start right in with rags to riches, overcoming the monster, etc. And I'm going to give you guys some content about my exploration using mostly movies. That's the thing about Booker is, all of this big fat book, a lot of it is 18th century novels, mythology, ancient stories, literature and play, a lot of these things that maybe you may not have read or you may not have heard of or you might not know about. So I'm planning on either using clips from movies or examples of stories that you're familiar with to kind of illustrate these things. And then really getting at what each of the seven plots, what their function is for you and for your community in life, and understanding those, how those things work, is only gonna behoove you. It's only gonna help you. Okay, so here's the seven plots in general, and I'm just going to give you a quick introduction, and then in this video, and then you'll have to check back for the more in-depth look at each one. So we've got Rags to Riches, Voyage and Return, Overcoming the Monster, Quest, Comedy, Tragedy, and Rebirth. Sounds pretty simple, and I'm sure that you can think of examples of each one of these yourself. All right. So rags to riches. What is rags to riches in general? Well, it's pretty simple. It's somebody who is overlooked, like our ugly duckling here, or Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, Popeye the Sailor Man, Rocky, Pretty Woman, David Copperfield, Aladdin, the street rat, Diamond in the Rough. Living in obscurity. So someone who is overlooked, neglected, who has potential, but that potential has not been realized yet. And then the story is that they're helped along by some mentor figure. They go all the way to the top. Cinderella dances with the prince, and then the clock strikes midnight, and they go all the way back down to the bottom, and then slowly climb back up to the top on their own power. So they get helped along by some magic at first, taste high society, taste the top of the mountain, fall all the way down, and then climb back up on their own strength. Think about it like a child learning how to ride a bike. You're given the bike, you don't know how to use it, so they put training wheels on the bike. You learn to ride the bike with the training wheels, but at some point the training wheels come off, you fall, you scrape your knee, but then you learn how to ride the bike without the training wheels, and all of a sudden you're a competent bike rider. That's basically what the Rags to Riches plot represents. So it is kind of a story about how to go from adolescence, when you're born into the world, born into society, you don't know how to work things. You don't know how to be competent with things. You don't know how to accomplish things. You don't know how to rule your kingdom effectively. You don't know how to build a household. You don't know how to hold down a job. You don't know how to have success. You don't know how to play the piano, right? And this is kind of a little picture, a little model of how that happens using the characters and the scenarios in this plot. Okay, so that's the first one. Think of that as almost the first story of your life. You know, a lot of children's stories take on this form. Okay, the next plot is overcoming the monster, and I'm doing these in a certain order for a reason, which I'll explain later. Overcoming the monster is also another very, very simple one. Essentially, there is a little place of order, of habitable order that you've carved out in the world, that the community has carved out in the world, and there's an inside and an outside. There's a safe place, you know, like your living room, or you know, the living under the protection of your parents, living in the protection of a safe community free of crime, etc., right? And then outside of the walls of that habitable order, that little Garden of Eden, that Sabbath rest. I'm going to talk about the notion of rest as it relates to this in the traditional Jewish sense. You're going to have a threat that's outside the borders of that sanctity, and it's going to threaten the survival of the community. And it can be a dragon, it can be a sea monster, it can be a crazy psychopathic person, and the hero then is required to learn about, discover, and root out that monster and confront it head on, and usually, pierce it or behead it, or otherwise destroy it. Right. So I'm going to use, Jaws, Jurassic Park, Alien, possibly Silence of the Lambs. Different stories that represent the overcoming the monster story. And this story really is about how to deal with the existence of predators, of malevolence, of evil in the world, right? So if Rags to Riches is about how to become competent and successful, this is about how to keep that world of order and tranquility that you've developed, right? This is about not losing your life, losing your community, losing the safety that you have, right? What to do about bullies, you might say. Okay, the next plot is Voyage and Return. This is a very interesting one of my favorite plot types, but it's one that's missed oftentimes. People kind of confuse it sometimes with the quest. They might even confuse it with Rags to Riches. There's a certain it's not talked about as much, but it is a very, very rich plot type. So yeah, you've got Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, Wizard of Oz, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prodigal Son, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Gone with the Wind, Time Machine, Orpheus, Lord of the Flies, Gulliver's Travels, The Matrix. Here, I'll get rid of myself for a second so you can see. Whoops. Okay, so this plot is somebody, Alice or the children in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe are sort of whisked away. They literally fall oftentimes into another world, into a dream-like place, a place where they don't belong. That's why sometimes I use the phrase fish out of water to describe this plot. And along the way, they go through, first they're enamored with the other world and it's almost like has a dreamlike quality, but then it starts to sour and then you start to realize that something is not right. And then it turns out that there are dark figures, there are nefarious, shadowy figures in this world that don't have the hero's best interest in mind. And then it winds up with a confrontation and overcoming of those dark forces within that other world, and then they return back to their world and it changed. So there's always a sense with the Voyage and Return that there's something wrong with the person initially, something out of whack. Yeah, oftentimes a blind spot or an overemphasis on the masculine, overemphasis on the feminine within themselves. This is a kind of a Jungian interpretation of it. And then by going on this journey, they learn about themselves and they become whole. They lose their blind spot so that they can see the whole picture. And then they come back to their life with perspective. That's basically the Voyage and Return plot. Okay. All right. The next plot is The Quest. This is obviously one of the most popular plot types out there, and one that everybody loves. It's interesting. It's got Dante's Divine Comedy is in The Quest, and this is part of the challenge of these things is that words change their meaning. To you, a comedy means a funny story, and to Dante, the comedy just means a happy ending. But in actuality, in our analysis, it is an example of a quest story. So you got Indiana Jones, you've got Watership Down, Finding Nemo, The Hobbit, Pilgrim's Progress, and so Treasure Island, Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. That's a great one. So this one is essentially there is a treasure or a something of infinite value, of value to the community, an elixir that the hero is called to pursue, something that is necessary, right? So this is kind of a picture of a community that is more or less functioning, but the to or the insight or the treasure or the thing that you need to grow, to expand, to survive over multiple generations is beyond the realm of safety. So you're going into the realm of crossing a border into the unknown, into the wildlands, similar to overcoming the monster. And then you're having to go and find this elixir and bring it back to the community. This is the plot type that most basically resembles Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, for example. And it differs from overcoming the monster in certain ways, although it includes an overcoming the monster story in it usually, just like Frodo or Bilbo, I'm sorry, in The Hobbit encounters a dragon, right? There's a certain way that the monster is encountered in the quest. So in a lot of ways, you could say that the quest story is a more sophisticated or at least more complex story type than the ones we've been looking at before. And I'm going to argue that this is more of a midlife story. This is a recovery from a midlife crisis story. And so you'll see why once we get to that section. Okay. And now we've got comedy and tragedy, two sides of the same coin. You all know about comedies. There's a million of them out there, but I'm just going to say something very, very quick about it because comedy in a lot of ways is the most difficult thing to analyze out of all of these things. But in general, you can think of comedy as going from confusion to clarity, right? Confusion to clarity. Confusion of identity, purpose, and where your place is in the world, to clarity about those questions. So think of Bridget Jones here, not knowing where she fits in the world. Who is she going to wind up with? How does her job relate to who she is? These are identity questions, and they're being worked out through the plot. Okay, and so comedy then is opposed to tragedy. So if comedy is about going from having no identity to having an identity, going from confusion to clarity, tragedy is going from having an identity to the death of that identity. It's going from having a body, having a community, having some habitable order, to the devolution of that into chaos. It's really, if you can think about a community or an organization or a character as a healthy body at first, there's a cancer that comes in, there's a flaw, there's some force, some entity that will cause the death of that body, the death of that organization. And so the driving force is from life to death, from the top down to the bottom. Yeah, and of course you know this. I mean, one of the most famous modern day stories of this is Breaking Bad. But you've got the Godfather, Faust, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Bonnie and Clyde. They all have this tragic flaw, this Aristotelian tragic flaw that causes their momentum to go the opposite direction as comedy, and the opposite direction as rags to riches, and all these things. So there's a sense that this is if the quest is a recovery from midlife after a fall in some sense, this represents the final death. This is what it looks like to die, for the community, for the individual, for any kind of healthy organism, right? Okay, so after tragedy, we then have rebirth. And the rebirth plot, I'll tell you what, is one of my favorite plots because it includes one of my favorite all-time films, Groundhog Day. But you've got probably the quintessential rebirth plot is A Tale of Two Cities, well, I should say, the quintessential rebirth storyteller is Dickens. Charles Dickens, because he's got The Tale of Two Cities, and then he's also got A Christmas Tale. So Ebenezer Scrooge is the perfect example of rebirth, right? He starts out as this curmudgeonly, what you would say, like a tragic figure, heading for tragedy. He's got the fatal flaw, the same fatal flaw that killed the characters in the tragedy, just the plot before. But rather than that taking over and winning, something happens. Something happens to cause a rebirth. So you've got Sleeping Beauty, A Christmas Tale, as I said, The Frog Prince, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky, The Secret Garden. So this is a very, very, very cool plot, because it has to do with not just redemption, because that's in the rebirth, the title, of rebirth, but it also has to do with what you might say repentance, right? True repentance. How do you change course? It's really the fundamental question. When you're headed on the road to tragedy, like Walter White, like Michael Corleone in The Godfather, when you're headed in that direction, is there some way, some mechanism by which you can get off that path and go back to life, right? Back to the world of the living, away from the pathway towards death and destruction. So it's a very, very fitting last plot for us to cover. Okay, so that's a very, very quick overview of the 7 plots. And here's how I kind of put them on a life cycle. We'll talk a little bit more about this now. But David Brooks has this concept, and it's this idea that your life, or anyone's life cycle, consists of 2 mountains. One is the mountain of success, and one is the mountain of legacy. One, you can think of it as success, material success, success of competence and skills and ability, recognition, everything that you would think of when you're talking about success in life. And then legacy is succession, the passing on of whatever it is that you built, whatever it is that you learned, whatever it is that you accomplished to the next generation, whether that's through actual physical offspring or whether it's through books and literature, anything that will cause the work that you've done in your life to continue on. So you can think of Voyage and Return, Overcoming the Monster, and Rags to Riches over here as, and then comedy, once we get up to the top here, as climbing this first mountain of success. Not always, but in general, right? You can think of Rags to Riches as the first story of your life, going from obscurity, pure potential, into learning how to function in life. And then you can think of Overcoming the Monster as venturing out of the sanctity of that safe place where you were born, out into the world where there are bad actors, where there are predators, where there are threats to you, and learning how to deal with those threats. And then you can think of Voyage and Return as this kind of maturing of ironing out your blind spots and your flaws as you go from adolescence into, let's say, middle age or something like that. Comedy has to do with finding your identity, finding your place, finding your name, finding your purpose, finding your other half. All of these things, like clarifying who it is that you are, right? And then as you come down this other side of the mountain, you've got your tragedy, which is a devolution of that identity, right? So now your identity is devolving back into, from unity back into diversity, from life back to death. And then the quest represents this valley here. If you start reading Dante's Divine Comedy, he starts in a dark wood, and he doesn't know where he's at. There's a sense of being lost. It's kind of like the midlife crisis is where the quest starts off. And then the quest is really going to find that elixir that the community needs. It's often a already competent hero that begins the quest, right? And this quest is now going to be the defining characteristic of not just their life of what they've accomplished so far, but their legacy, how they're remembered, how they can transcend the limits of time of their actual life. And then rebirth would be then kind of this idea of how you take all that and pass it on to the next generation. How success leads to succession, right? I know I'm talking very fast, and and this is a lot, and these claims need to be backed up. I totally understand that. But this is a basic overview of how I want to present these plot types to you. Okay, so this is the last piece that I'm going to give you, and then I'm going to end the video for today, and then you're going to check back and see the first video about the first plot, Rags to Riches, next time. Think of the 5 acts, 5-act story structures, how I'm going to be analyzing all of these plots as having this common sense to it. It's not exactly the same in every plot, but in general, you're going to be looking for these moods. Not necessarily like beats, like this is what has to happen at this point in every plot, but moods that color each section of the plot, right? So every story starts out with some kind of anticipation stage, and it's basically just a hint about what's to come. In Overcoming the Monster, it shows a tranquil community and then some kind of threat, right? In Voyage and Return, it shows some kind of little flaw that the hero has just before they fall into this other world, right? Okay, and then the next stage is the dream stage. This is now the stage where after you get some inkling of what's about to happen, the plot starts, right? So in Voyage and Return, the children get sucked into Narnia, you know, or another great Voyage and Return story is Shawshank Redemption, where Andy Dufresne is sent to prison. He's sent to another world. Alice falls down into this through the looking glass, right, or down the rabbit hole, right. And then the dream stage is not really real. It's a fantasy world, you know. In Overcoming the Monster, the dream stage is, you know, they hear about the shark and they go out and they catch a shark and they think, well, this must be it, right? Okay, we caught the shark, we're okay, right? There's always this sense of being enamored with this new world, and there's this kind of initial success. It's like, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can live in this other world, right? But that's before the real antagonists start to kick in, right? And once the forces of antagonism, that's a story term I'd borrow from Robert McKee. once the forces of antagonism kick in, then you go to this frustration stage. That's where reality bites back. Like reality starts to come in and say, this problem is bigger than you think. These villains are more powerful than you think. The shark is more dangerous than you think. You can't just solve it by going out there and killing some random other shark, right? The shark is still out there. And then that leads, right? Now the hero's having to rise to the occasion, bigger challenges, to the nightmare stage. And the nightmare stage is where the full force of the forces of antagonism come down onto the hero's head, right? So this is now where the classic hero at the mercy of the villain scene, right? In James Bond, it's like once the villain has captured James Bond and now he's trapped, he's captured, he's imprisoned, right? Something like that. And then you have your conclusion, thrilling escape, resolution. Now, what's super, super interesting about this is these stages are the same ones that you get in tragedy, right? And this will be super fun to explore. I'm not going to go into exactly how they work in tragedy now, but they're the same stages, so you can find these stages in all of them. So if you're going to sit down and write, a rags to riches story, or a quest story, or a tragedy, or a comedy, you might plot it out in this way: acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So this is Booker's schema here, which I think is very helpful. Okay, so that's the basic overview of the 7 plots. And I'm just going to start working my way when I have some extra time here and there, slowly, 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 through these 7 plots. I'm going to see how far I can get. And if you want to come along the journey with me, I'll put out the videos and you can let me know what you think. All right, thanks.